Dark and menacing, Northrop's P-61 Black Widow was a night stalker of the worst kind. Large, powerful and fast, the P-61 was the first American combat aircraft to be designed from the ground up as a night fighter. As large as a medium bomber, the P-61 was optimized for nocturnal air-to-air combat. Considered to be one of the ugliest fighters to see service, the Black Widow was in fact a killer. Beneath its slick black coat, the P-61 proved extremely efficient, invisibly approaching German and Japanese aircraft and blasting them from the sky. The birth of the P-61 can be traced back to 1940. During the unrelenting Blitz, German bombers roamed at will over Britain. Britain's night fighter force proved ineffective, but during the Blitz, a small number of fighters were equipped with the new and top-secret airborne interception radar. Desperate for an effective night fighter, the British showed the Americans their new radar in the hopes they could build a new fighter to carry it. British requirements were tough. The new fighter had to be fast, heavily armed, with a loiter time of 8 hours over the target area. Northrop rose to the challenge. Initial design work would begin in 1940, but it wasn't until late 1944 that the Black Widow entered service. Plagued by constant design changes, the P-61 prototype did not take to the air until May 1942. By June 1944, the P-61 was finally ready for combat. On July 6, the P-61 recorded its first victory with the destruction of a Japanese Betty bomber. In Europe, P-61s would gain glory by running up an impressive score against Germany's nasty V-1 flying bomb. 9 V-1 kills would be credited to P-61 crews. By the time the P-61s entered combat, targets were scarce in both Europe and the Pacific. In Europe, however, Black Widow intruder missions proved extremely effective. Night after night, P-61s would fly deep into Germany, destroying anything that moved. Large numbers of locomotives, supply convoys, and the odd bridge were destroyed. P-61 crews were also credited with a number of Luftwaffe fighters, both in the air and on the ground. In the end, only 2 squadrons would serve in Europe. The 422nd would be credited with 43 enemy aircraft destroyed, with the 425th chipping in another 10. The P-61, for all its promise and performance, was finally phased out by the United States Army Air Force Service in 1950 and replaced by the F-82 Twin Mustang. But the P-61 would fly again, not with guns, but with eyes of a spider. Responding to the Air Force's need for a long-range photo-reconnaissance aircraft, Howard Hughes designed and built the XF-11. Unfortunately, on July 7, 1946, the XF-11 flown by Hughes crashed into a Los Angeles neighborhood. Continuing problems with the XF-11 caused the United States Air Force to cancel the project and turn to Northrop. The result was an order for 320 F-15 reporters. The F-15 was created using the XP-61E, the last fighter variant of the famed Black Widow. After just 6 months of flying time, the XP-61 was returned to Northrop for extensive modification. With guns removed, a new nose was fitted, equipped with a number of aerial cameras. Designated as the XF-15, this new aircraft flew for the first time on July 3, 1945. Using existing P-61 wings, engines and tail sections, the new F-15 Reporter had a more streamlined fuselage that housed a crew of 2 under a continuous bubble canopy. The revised center section had the pilot and camera operator sitting in tandem. The rear seat was equipped with rudimentary flying controls, which made it possible for the camera operator to aid the pilot on long missions. The aircraft's 6 cameras were placed in the elongated nose, replacing the 4 20mm cannon. Powered by 2 turbo-supercharged R2800-73 engines, the F-15 had a sparkling top speed of 440 miles per hour at 33,000 feet. In terms of performance, the F-15 possessed similar flight characteristics to the troublesome XF-11. This in spite of being powered by less powerful engines. The F-15 was accepted in September 1946, but by 1947 the United States Army Air Force cancelled the contract, leaving just 36 examples being accepted into service. During its operational lifetime, the F-15 Reporter did what it was supposed to do. Responsible for most of the aerial maps of North Korea, its contribution proved extremely valuable during the coming Korean War. The combat career of the P-61 Black Widow was an extremely short one. Measured in just months, it was the shortest of all the American fighters to appear in World War II. As America's first purpose-built night fighter, the Widow proved extremely effective. Unfortunately, its late arrival meant a combat record of unimpressive numbers. In fact, of the 35,000 fighter pilots trained by the United States, just 485 were trained as night fighters. While the F-15 Reporter would have a longer career, it was not a distinguished one. With just 36 built, the F-15 would suffer from poor serviceability rates due to a lack of spare parts.
As Britain and the Allies struggled for survival in a fierce battle with the Nazis, American industrial might was mobilized to supply them with the weapons and machines to beat back the German onslaught. Millionaire Howard Hughes was anxious to participate in the war effort to do his part to defeat Hitler. His intentions were not completely altruistic. A military contract would also have been extremely profitable. Hughes built the prototype D-2, a speedy wooden fighter/bomber, entirely with his own money and in secret. He hoped to amaze the U.S. Army Air Force with it, but the plane was flatly rejected. Fortunately for Hughes, he had friends in high places. When President Roosevelt declared war on December 8, 1941, he had not only to consider the fate of the free world and the lives of millions of American soldiers, he also had to weigh the risks to his own sons. Elliott Roosevelt was a member of the U.S. Army Air Force. He had received his captain's commission on his 30th birthday in 1940. At the time, Roosevelt was battling for a third term in office, and there were cries of nepotism. But General Henry Hap Arnold, chief of the Air Corps, silenced those rumors. Elliott Roosevelt's poor eyesight left him classified as 4F, or unfit to fly, but he still managed to carve out a respectable career, participating in 89 combat missions. Reconnaissance was his specialty, and he was considered the leading expert in recon in the European theater, and a pioneer in aerial night photography. While commanding the 3rd Reconnaissance Group in Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa, Roosevelt had a chance to fly on board a speedy de Havilland Mosquito. He was so impressed with de Havilland's wooden wonder, he became a passionate advocate of British aircraft and believed American-made B-17s and P-38s were sitting ducks against the German defenses. His enthusiasm may have blinded him when a sly Howard Hughes presented him with a prototype for his own wooden aircraft, the D-2. The D-2 was a twin-boom fighter just like the Vultee Swoosh Goose, designed by Hughes' former employee Richard Palmer. Palmer left Hughes for Vultee because he was tired of the company's lack of focus. The D-2 also had a remarkable resemblance to the P-38 Lightning. They were so similar, Hughes did not believe it was a coincidence, and he testified to the Senate that Lockheed had stolen his design. Though the D-2 had been rejected by the U.S. Army Air Force, when Colonel Elliott Roosevelt came to town looking for a new reconnaissance plane, Hughes dazzled him Hollywood-style to salvage a contract. The P-38 Lightning had been the workhorse reconnaissance plane for the U.S. Army Air Force, but by 1943, they were looking for an upgrade. Colonel Roosevelt, an expert in recon, was asked to explore what aircraft were in the works that might take over for the P-38. Hughes spared no expense when Roosevelt came to see his plant in Culver City, California. A line of limousines greeted the president's son and his staff at the airport, and they were taken on the trip of their lives. Women and starlets were thrown at them. They were treated to Hollywood's most extravagant parties in the hottest nightclubs. A married Roosevelt was introduced to his next wife, Faye Emerson, an up-and-coming actress with whom he would have a scandalous affair. In the midst of all this partying, there was time to see the D-2. Its Duramold body, a type of plywood bonded with plastic and molded under heat and pressure, would certainly have impressed Roosevelt, who was enamored with a Mosquito. By the time Colonel Roosevelt left California, he was sold on the D-2. He became an enthusiastic salesman for Hughes when he briefed General Arnold and his father on the project. Arnold was in a difficult position, as Material Command had already rejected the aircraft. They did not believe Hughes had the facilities or track record to deliver on an order. In the end, Arnold had no choice but to listen to the president's son. He ordered the XF-11, an all-metal and larger reconnaissance version of the D-2. The decision caused an uproar in the Army Air Force, not only because the D-2 had been rejected, but also because they already had a similar plane in development, the Lockheed Chain Lightning. The XP-58 was a long-range heavy fighter which could outperform the D-2, and it came from a known and reliable aircraft and manufacturer, the P-38 Lightning, built by Lockheed. Uproar or not, Elliott had his father's ear. Hughes won a $43 million contract to build 100 XF-11s, a contract that would be worth $500 million today. Unfortunately for the Army Air Force, their worst fears about Hughes came to be. Work progressed slowly on the XF-11. Each of its Pratt & Whitney 28-cylinder radial engines drove a pair of contra-rotating four-bladed controllable pitch propellers. It was hoped this style of prop would increase performance and stability, but the whole system was too complex and ultimately scrapped. As years passed, the XF-11 project, forced on the U.S. Army Air Force, became increasingly unpopular. The original D-2 prototype was mysteriously destroyed in a fire in November of 1944. At the time, Hughes and the U.S. Army Air Force were fighting over who should pay for the original development costs. With the prototype a pile of ash, the two sides agreed to split the costs. It was an accident which was highly convenient for the millionaire. Like the XF-11, controversy followed Colonel Roosevelt as the war progressed. Project Aphrodite was a joint mission between the U.S. Navy and U.S. Army Air Force to destroy heavily fortified German submarine pens and V-2 sites with bomber drones. The pilot and co-pilot would take aircraft heavily loaded with explosives to altitude before parachuting to safety. A mothership remotely controlled the bombers the rest of the way via radio. In later years, Elliott Roosevelt claimed to be in the Mosquito chase plane that recorded the tragic death of Lieutenant Joe Kennedy Jr., brother of future President John F. Kennedy. His plane inexplicably detonated before it reached its target. Elliott asserted that he actually flew through the deadly fireball that ensued, but there is no record of the president's son participating in the mission. There was also some controversy when Roosevelt was finally awarded his wings. General Arnold, who had been forced to accept Hughes' XF-11, also had his arm twisted to intervene in Colonel Roosevelt's final promotion. In January of 1945, Arnold ordered General Carl Spaatz to appoint Elliott, whose poor vision had left him classified as 4F, or unfit to fly, as a rated pilot. The president then submitted his son's name to the Senate for promotion to brigadier general. On April 12, 1945, America mourned the death of President Roosevelt. He had accomplished much during his tenure, guiding them out of the Depression and through the war. As tragic as his passing was, it did untie the hands of General Arnold. He was finally able to put millionaire Howard Hughes in his place. The XF-11 order was canceled a month after the president's death on May 11, 1945, though Hughes was allowed to continue to work on the prototypes. By the time the war ended, Hughes still had little to show for all the money spent on the XF-11. It would be another year before a prototype would fly, and the first flight ended in a crash that nearly killed him. The XF-11 was not Hughes's only multi-million-dollar scandal. His behemoth transport, the H-4 Spruce Goose, was more of a lame duck and was yet to fly. With millions of dollars poured into both projects, questions swirled in the Senate about what Hughes was doing with the money. In 1947, the Brewster Committee looked into the spending irregularities surrounding these projects.
I put the sweat of my life into this thing. I have my reputation rolled up in it. And I have stated several times that if it's a failure, I'll probably leave this country and never come back, and I mean it.
Elliott Roosevelt and Johnny Myers were also called as witnesses. Myers, a publicist who worked for Hughes, gave a detailed expense report of all the perks Roosevelt had received during his time in California.
Well, now, can you tell me why you were charging up to aircraft production $132 for a nylon hose for Miss Emerson?
Because she'd been very charming. Just like the presidents up higher. The girls were very pleasant.
What has that got to do with aircraft production?
They just went along. Every company in the business did it. We're no different.
Well, but is it, you say because she was very charming, that's the reason that you charged up $132.
That's right.
For the which would go into the production of airplanes.
That's right.
And now, will you tell us why you gave her $20 and charged it up to the company to go home if she was very charming?
What? You taught me.
Myers had even paid for Roosevelt's wedding to Faye Emerson. In his defense, Roosevelt claimed that he first heard about the XF-11 after the Culver City visit in a briefing from Arnold.
And there are efforts to find out whether there was any connection that I might have had with the chief executive, which might have had an effect on any war contracts. And I'm here to give you the complete facts. It is undoubtedly true that he bought some tickets to from New York to Washington. But I still want you to put the question to him, was he completely positive that one of those tickets was for Elliott Roosevelt?
Well, I'll put it right to him now. Mr. Myers, what do you say? Look at that sheet. You told us about them being lost and buying the fares back. Now, what do you say about it?
Just what it says here. It says Colonel Elliott Roosevelt Party.
Yeah.
So I didn't testify that he was one of them. He could have been one of the other fellows. Did I say that under the word Elliott Roosevelt Party? What?
During a break in hearings, Hughes decided to give the Senate all the evidence they needed that the Spruce Goose was fit to fly. While taxi testing the aircraft, he took the H-4 on its first and only flight. In daredevil fashion, Hughes proved to the cameras and reporters that the millions of American tax dollars had not been squandered or misappropriated. The millionaire used his Hollywood dazzle to save his own skin.
The Northrop P-61 Black Widow is a twin-engine United States Army Air Force fighter aircraft of World War II. It was the first operational U.S. warplane designed as a night fighter, and the first aircraft designed specifically as a night fighter. Created by Northrop Aviation in collaboration with the British Royal Air Force, the P-61 was also the first aircraft designed to use radar. With its mysterious appearance and name, the Black Widow ruled the night in the waning months of World War II. When World War II began, the U.S. Army Corps and the British Royal Air Force flew mostly outdated aircraft compared to the war-ready counterparts on the Axis side. In August 1940, 16 months before the United States entered the war, the U.S. air officer in London, Lieutenant General Della C. Emmons, was briefed on British research and radar, which had been underway since 1935 and had played an important role in the nation's defense against the Luftwaffe during the Battle of Britain. General Emanos was informed of the new Airborne Intercept Radar, AI for short, a self-contained unit that could be installed in aircraft and operated independently of ground stations. In September 1940, the Tazard mission traded British research, including the cavity magnetron, that would make self-contained interception radar installations practicable for American production. Simultaneously, the British Purchasing Commission, evaluating U.S. aircraft, declared their urgent need for a high-altitude, high-speed aircraft to intercept the Luftwaffe bombers attacking London at night. Night fighters would soon become their own category of aircraft. A night fighter was a fighter concept. Still, it wasn't until after the catastrophic bombing raids over Europe, particularly the London Blitz in 1940, that the military air force has really found a need for a plane catering specifically to these types of missions. The Northrop Aircraft Corporation, located in California, had only been in active operation since 1939, mainly as a subcontractor for larger aircraft manufacturers. It was definitely an unlikely candidate to develop the world's first night fighter. More prominent corporations such as Lockheed, Grumman, and Douglas were already committed beyond their capacity, stocking America's existing aircraft fleet. Northrop availability gave it a window of opportunity. On the 5th of November, Northrop and Pavleka met at Wright Field with Air Materiel Command officers and presented them with Northrop's preliminary design. The Douglas XA-26A night fighter proposal was the only competition. Northrop's design was selected. Following the USAAC acceptance, Northrop began a comprehensive design work on what would become the first dedicated night fighter. The result was the largest Pursuit-class aircraft flown by the U.S. during the war. The aircraft was huge, as Northrop had anticipated. While far larger and heavier multi-engine bombers existed, its 45.5 feet or 14-meter length, 66-foot or 20-meter wingspan, and projected 22,600 pounds or 10,251 kilo full load weight were unheard for a fighter, making the P-61 hard for many to accept as a feasible fighter aircraft. Some alternate design features were investigated before finalization. Late in November 1940, Jack Northrop returned to the crew of 3 and twin-tail rudder assembly. To meet the USAAC's request for more firepower, designers abandoned the ventral turret and mounted 4 20mm Hispano M2 cannons in the wings. As the design evolved, the cannons were repositioned in the belly of the aircraft. The P-61 therefore became one of the few US-designed fighter aircraft to have a quartet of 20mm cannon, along with the NA-91 version of the Mustang, and the US Navy's operated F-4U-1C Corsair, as factory standard in World War II. Following a few small changes, Northrop's NS-8A fulfilled the USAAC's requirements, and the Air Corps issued Northrop a letter of authority for purchase on December 17th. A contract for 2 prototypes and 2 scale models to be used for wind tunnel testing was awarded on the 10th of January 1941. Northrop's Specification 8A became, by designation of the War Department, the XP-61. Northrop's engineers built a full-scale wooden mock-up of the XP-61. So, on March 10th, another contract was approved by the Undersecretary of War This ensured the production of 13 YP-61s, and the groundwork was laid for the production of the airframes that would become the famous P-61 Black Widows. It was also a rather large aircraft for a fighter, at 50 feet long and a wingspan of 66 feet. The P-61 was a twin-boom design with a crew consisting of a pilot, gunner, and a new member, a radar operator. He would operate the compact airborne interceptors specifically designed to fit inside an aircraft, leaving out the middleman who had previously relied on instructions from radar-operated out-of-ground stations. The production model of the SCR-720A mounted a scanning radio transmitter in the aircraft nose. In airborne intercept mode, it had a range of nearly 5 miles, or 8 kilometers. The unit also functioned as an airborne beacon or homing device, navigational aid, or in concert with interrogator responder units. The XP-61's radar operator located targets on his scope and steered the unit to track them, vectoring and steering the pilot to the radar target via oral instruction and correction. Once within range, the pilot used a smaller scope integrated into the main instrument panel to track and close on the target. This rotating 30-inch scanner receiver dish antenna would sweep the sky with a knife-like beam. When used, it reduced the ground echoes that plagued long-wave radars at low altitude. This shorter wavelength enhanced accuracy, betting interceptors within just 100 yards of intruders in total darkness. His radical shift was the main reason that the Black Widow could fly at night, as the device allowed pilots to navigate and locate airborne enemies in real time. Red-colored cockpit lighting was another innovation that further aided the vision and night fighting. The Black Widow's lethal bite could rival any that the enemy had to offer. It was armed with 4 20mm Hispano M2 forward-firing cannons mounted in the lower fuselage, and 4 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns lined up horizontally with the 2 middle guns slightly offset upwards in a remotely aimed dorsally mounted turret. A similar arrangement to that used in the B-29 Superfortress, using 4-gun upper-forward remote turrets. The XP-61's spine-mounted dorsal remote turret, driven by the General Electric gyroscopic fire control computer, could be aimed and fired by the gunner or radar operator, who both had aiming control and gyroscopic collimator sighting posts attached to their swiveling seats, or could be locked forward to be fired by the pilot in addition to the 20mm cannon. The radar operator could rotate the turret to engage targets behind the aircraft. Capable of a full 360 rotation and 90-degree elevation, the turret could be used to engage any target in the hemisphere, above and to the sides of the XP-61. The unique system was to often have difficulty achieving an accurate aim. The P-61 was powered by 2 Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp radial engines, each packing 2,000 horsepower. The 2 engines were each mounted approximately 1/6 out on the wingspan. It was capable of a maximum speed of 366 miles an hour, which was relatively fast considering its immense size. The P-61 also had an internal fuel capacity of 646 gallons. Its estimated fighting weight was over 29,000 pounds. Main landing gear bays were located at the bottom of each nacelle, directly behind the engine. Each engine cowling and nacelle drew back into tail booms that terminated upward in large vertical stabilizers, and their component rudders, each of a similar shape to a rounded right triangle. The horizontal stabilizer extended between the inner surfaces of the 2 vertical stabilizers, and was approximately 3/4 the chord of the wing root, including the elevator. The elevator spanned approximately 1/3 of the horizontal stabilizer's width, and, in overhead plan view, angled inwards in the horizontal from both corners of the leading edge towards the triangle edge approximately 15 degrees, forming the elevator into a wide, short trapezoid. Leading edge updraft carburetor intakes were present on the wing shoulder and the root of the outer wing, with a few inches of separation from the engine nacelle itself. Thin horizontal rectangles, with the ends rounded out to nearly a half circle, with multiple vertical vanes inside of it to direct the airstream properly. The main fuselage was centered on the aircraft's centerline. It was, from the tip of the nose to the end of the plexiglass tail cone, approximately 5/6 the length of one wing. The nose housed an evolved form of the Signal Corps' radar SCR-268, the Western Electric Company's SCR-720A. Immediately behind the radar was the multi-framed greenhouse canopy, featuring two distinct levels, one for the pilot and a second for the gunner above him and behind him, the latter elevated by approximately 6 inches or 150 millimeters. The forward canopy in the XP-61 featured contiguous, smooth-curved, blown plexiglass canopy sections facing forward, in front of the pilot and the gunner. Beneath the forward crew compartment was the nose gear wheel well, through which the pilot and gunner entered and exited the aircraft. The radar's operator station was at the aft end of the gondola. The radar operator controlled the radar set and viewed its display scopes from the isolated rear compartment, which he entered by the way of a small hatch with a built-in ladder on the underside of the aircraft. The overall design was exceptionally clean and fluid, as the aircraft possessed very few sharp corners or edges. Another stealthy innovation was the new glossy black paint in the metal armor instead of the usual olive green and gray paint. Like flight tests in Florida in October 1943 pitted both schemes against each other, the black color was not detached in 80% of flights throughout the gauntlet of anti-aircraft searchlights. Starting in February 1944, all Black Widows were painted deep black, allowing the P-61 to truly fit its name. It took Northrop engineers over a year and a half to fix developmental delays and revisions. All the while, the Army Air Forces were desperate to start training night pilots. They have no problem getting the crews of volunteers to the training. Redesigns during the production phase cost Northrop 2 critical wartime years. Although its late rollout and obsolescence will ultimately be its demise. The Black Widow delay is turned into a platform for innovation. The P-61's official public debut was quite dramatic. In January 1944, AA-61 performed a nighttime flyover of the Los Angeles Coliseum, filled with 75,000 attendees as part of a new Army-Navy show. According to some accounts, the crowd couldn't see the plane and could only hear its engines passing over. The first squadron to fly the Black Widow in Europe was the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron on May 23, 1944. Almost a month later, the 425th Squadron received their Black Widows. However, both of them received the aircraft too late to participate in the D-Day invasion on June 6th. The first P-61 engagement in European theater occurred on the 15th of July, when a P-61 piloted by Lieutenant Hermann Ernst was directed to intercept a V-1 flying bomb. Diving from above and behind to match the V-1's 350-mile-an-hour speed, the P-61's plastic rear cone imploded under pressure and the attack was aborted. The tail cones failed on several P-61A models before this problem was corrected. On the 16th of July, Lieutenant Ernst was again directed to attack a V-1, and, this time, was successful, giving the 422nd NFS and the European theater its first P-61 kill. The absence of turrets and gunners in most European theater P-61s presented several unique challenges. The 422nd NFS kept its radar operator in the rear compartment, meaning the pilot had no visual contact with the operator. As a result, several pilots continued flying their critically damaged P-61s under the mistaken belief that the radar operator was injured and unconscious, when he had already bailed out. The 425th NFS moved the radar operator to the gunner's position behind the pilot. This provided an extra set of eyes up front and moved the aircraft's center of gravity about 15 inches or 380 millimeters forward, changing the flight characteristics from slightly nose up to slightly nose down, which improved the P-61's overall performance. By December 1944, P-61s of the 422nd and 425th NFS were helping to repel the German offensive known as the Battle of the Bulge, with 2 flying cover of the town of Bastogne. Pilots of the 422nd and 425th NFS switched their tactics from night flighting to daylight ground attack, strafing German supply lines and railroads. The P-61's 420mm cannon proved effective in destroying German locomotives and trucks. During this battle, the P-61 obsolescence became apparent. Lieutenant van Nieuwswande was piloting his Daisy May Black Widow when an encounter with the twin-engine Messerschmitt 410 led to a pursuit across the top of the woods. This wonder attempted to attack and follow its enemy by chasing it at full throttle, but by the time the Black Widow caught up, the ME-410 pulled away at 400 miles an hour, making the P-61 seem painfully slow in comparison. The 422nd and 425th Squadrons also found themselves critically short of spare parts by the end of 1944. Being a smaller company, Northrop couldn't keep up with the demand and supply issue was never corrected. The squadron had made do with whatever equipment they had on hand. Most operational 61s ended up being sent to the Pacific. After Guadalcanal was secured in late 1942, the American stronghold urgently needed nighttime protection from Japanese nighttime raids launched out of bases in the surrounding areas. The Black Widows weren't ready yet, so the Americans temporarily adapted B-25s, P-40s, P-38s, and P-70s as night fighters. Finally, in May 1944, the Black Widows were ready to fly in the Pacific. The first to receive a P-61 was the 6th Night Fighter Squadron. They were the only night fighting squadron until the 418th and 419th Squadrons also began working with Black Widows. On July 1st, 1944, the 421st Squadron was also activated, and, operating from bases at Nadzab, New Guinea, and Wake Island, actual fighting by the P-61 was sparse. The 418th Squadron, based on the island of Morotai in the Hull, Maharas, and the Duchious Indies operate at the top, scoring Black Widow. Highlighting the P-61 light action and combat, the 418th conducted a mere 18 successful attacks. Its most triumphant mission came when the 3 Kawasaki Ki-61s were destroyed in a single night. Despite its innovative design, the P-61 was only able to play a minor role during the last 6 months of World War II. The Axis powers were already too weak to put up much of a fight on the ground, let alone in the air. The Lady in the Dark 61, piloted by Captain Lee Kendall, is perhaps the best-known Black Widow in the world. The fighter was photographed hundreds of times in the Pacific Theater. It was also the aircraft that presumably scored all the final 2 aerial kills of World War II. The first kill happened on the night of the war, and the second one almost an entire day after all battles had officially ended. Captain Kendall took down Japanese Imperial Army aircraft in kamikaze missions by aggressively pursuing them and causing them to crash on their own. The P-61 proved capable against all Japanese aircraft it encountered, but saw too few of them to make any significant difference in the Pacific War effort. Simply put, the 61 arrived too late to World War II. Although it was useful in battles against the Japanese Air Force, it was already obsolete in Europe by the time it got there. Northrop engineers tried to fix as many issues forced by the P-61 as possible. He redesigned the airborne intercept radar and improved the remote control turret. Turbochargers were also added to the aircraft, but it still lagged in speed. Despite his late arrival, Black Widow still saw combat in every theater of World War II. The fighter destroyed a total of 127 enemy aircraft and 18 German V-1 buzz bombs. The useful life of the Black Widow was extended for a few years into the immediate post-war period due to the USAAF's problems in developing a useful jet-powered night/all-weather fighter. Shortly after the war, a Black Widow was used in early American ejection seat experiments. The P-61 was heavily involved in the Thunderstorm project from 1946 to 1949, a landmark effort to gather data on thunderstorm activity. The project was a joint effort by 4 U.S. government agencies, the U.S. Weather Bureau and the NACA, assisted by the U.S. Army Air Forces and Navy. Scientists from several universities also helped the launch, design, and conduct of the project, which aimed to learn more about thunderstorms and how to better protect civil and military airplanes from them. The P-61's radar and particular flight characteristics enabled it to find and penetrate the most turbulent regions of a storm, and returned crew and instruments intact for detailed study. Surviving aircraft were offered to civilian governmental agencies, or declared surplus and offered for sale on the commercial market. 5 were eventually issued civil registrations. The P-61 was, in fact, a remarkable response to the mission set for it, but that mission had already changed before it got into combat. Northrop, a small manufacturer that rose to meet the challenge, did an amazing job of building a sophisticated, new technology airplane that had no precedent. They didn't adapt an earlier design to become a night fighter or base the P-61 on anything that already existed. They started with a clean sheet of paper and invented the first all-weather day-night interceptor. In that sense, it was the beginning of today's anytime, anywhere 24-hour U.S. Air Force. It was the start of something else big, too. Oddball specialty airframer Northrop aircraft, once small enough that it could be given the night fighter assignment without disturbing the work of such long-gone industry giants as Republic and North American, is today the Northrop Grumman Corporation, the 5th largest defense contractor in the world.
This is the P-61, called the Black Widow. She's well named because she packs 4 caliber 50 machine guns and 4 20mm cannon. An obituary notice goes with each bite. Those twin engines will carry her fast enough to catch up with almost anything in the sky. And she's maneuverable, as a fighter should be. Very easy to handle. She stalls, takes off, and lands at low speeds. Getting checked out on her is a pleasure. The Black Widow flies the skies in 3 sleek models. First, the YP-61, the earliest model of this ebony killer. Then the P-61A, the first model to go into combat service. And finally, the P-61B, the newest combat version. Let's watch this pilot learning his stuff on a P-61A. The first thing to do is familiarize yourself with the cockpit. Learn where all the controls and gauges are located. The TO for the airplane is a big help. Diagrams and photographs make it easy for you to get to know the ship. After a couple of hours of study, you are able to pick out the controls and gauges without the loss of a second. And with your eyes shut. That's important because you can't afford to waste time in this fast twin-engine job. And there's no co-pilot around to help you. You're going up for a ride, just to get the feel of the ship. But first you have to check the airplane, thoroughly. That's your best guarantee for living to a ripe old age. Like most airplanes equipped with tricycle landing gear, the 61 has a nose gear towing pin. Check it, as the nose wheel may shimmy on takeoff and become damaged. Check the nose wheel pin cap. Be sure it's on tight. Then check the rest of the landing gear for inflation of the tire and general condition. The red mark shows whether the tire has slipped on the rim. The strut ought to be extended about 4 inches. And another item not to be forgotten is the pressure in the emergency landing gear system. There's a gauge in each wheel well. It should show 700 pounds per square inch for the nose gear. Repeat the same inspection on the other 2 wheels. No cuts or bruises. Tread's okay. No slippage. Strut clean and extended around 4 inches. And the emergency pressure? 750 pounds per square inch for the main landing gear. Now to give the exterior of the plane a general going over. Skin's all right. No loose rivets or dents. Antenna mounted securely. De-icer boots okay. No rips or places where oil or gasoline has been spilled. Gun bay doors tight. Control surfaces in good shape. All hatches and doors must be closed and locked. Otherwise, they'll blow open and probably off when the plane's in the air. So each one should be checked. The radar operator's top hatch, rear entrance door. Now you can get into the cockpit, but you have to climb right out again through the top hatch. Careful not to step on any plexiglass. There's one thing more to check outside the airplane. The gas tank filler caps. Two on each side, and oil cap. Make sure they're fastened tightly in place. Here's an old story, but a wise one. Form 1A. Check and sign for red diagonals. Turn on the circuit breakers behind the gunner's seat. And make sure the gunner's escape hatch is closed and locked. From now on, you are in command of the airplane. What would you do now? Well, you know the answer to that from studying the tech order. Turn on the generators. Then more circuit breakers. The ones for the starters and fuel booster pumps. And the light circuit breakers. Now look around the cockpit to see if everything is in order. Nothing loose. No tools or papers to foul up the controls. Instruments okay. The controls, and that includes the throttles, are locked. Unlock and try them out. Operate the rudders, elevators. Put ailerons through their complete range. Notice that those ailerons are unusual? They're the spoiler type, especially effective at high speeds. The P-61 is the only airplane in the Army Air Forces that has them. Controls are all okay. See if all the controls and switches are set properly. Open throttles 1/4 to 1/3. Prop control switches in automatic. Feathering switches normal. Test the prop circuit breakers to make sure the buttons are in. Check fuel in all tanks. Fuel valves set to outboard tanks. Crossfeed, which supplies both engines from one tank, off. Air pressure for the emergency brakes ought to be 425 to 450 pounds per square inch. Check the clock against your watch and the altimeter. Oxygen pressure 425 pounds per square inch. Oxygen regulator to auto mix on. Test the trim tabs. If they're in good working order, set them for takeoff. Now the instructor is ready to take over. While the ground crew pulls props through 12 blades, set the superchargers at neutral. And throttles 1/4 to 1/3 open. Adjust both mixture controls to idle cutoff. Props at full increase RPM. Check to see that the props are clear. Then turn on the battery switches. On the P-61A, there are 2 individual battery switches and a master battery switch. The master switch on the ignition unit is for ignition only. Turn booster pumps to low. Carburetor air cold. Oil shutters 1/3 open. Make sure all cowl flaps are open and the intercooler flaps closed. Automatic pilot oil pressure off. Make sure that the VHF switches are off. Check carburetor air filter. Turn on master ignition switch and the right switch to both. Energize the starter and then prime the engine in the last 5 seconds of energizing. Since a putt-putt is furnishing your power, you should energize for no longer than 10 seconds before flipping the switch to mesh. If you were using the battery, the maximum energizing period would be 20 seconds. Don't energize beyond those limits or you'll damage the starter. When the putt-putt is being used, only your main battery switch should be on. Turn on the other switches when the crew chief disconnects the putt-putt. Adjust your mixture control to auto-rich. Close the throttle to run your engine as slowly as possible until oil pressure is indicated. As soon as oil pressure shows, adjust to between 1,000 and 1,200 RPM to prevent fouling of the plugs as a consequence of prolonged idling. Now we're ready to run through the same procedure for the left engine. Throttle to between 600 and 700 RPM until the oil pressure gauges indicate a steady pressure. The cold oil pressure will go up to 150 or 200 pounds until the oil temperature gets to 40 or 50 degrees centigrade. Keep the prop governor in high RPM. Turn the fuel booster pumps off. Your fuel pressure should be between 15 and 17 pounds. When the oil temperature gets to about 40 degrees centigrade, open the oil cooler flaps about 1/3. Keep the engine cowl flaps open. Operate the cowl flaps and intercooler flaps, watching them from the window. Operate the oil cooler flaps and check the gauge. Check both hydraulic pressure gauges. Make your interphone check and see that all entrance hatches are closed and locked. Okay to taxi to runway 29. Use taxi strip directly in front of you.
Runway 29, roger.
Use brakes for taxiing as little as possible. This holds good for any two-engined airplane. And when you want to turn, use your outboard engine. Always taxi with your flaps up. Set brakes and proceed to make check. Your oil pressure should be at normal, and cylinder head temperature must be over 100 degrees. Now check one engine at a time. See that the prop is at high RPM, and put mixture control in auto rich. Open your throttle briefly to about 40 inches to clean the engine out. Then reduce manifold pressure to 30 inches. RPM should be from 1950 to 2100. Check your ammeter. It ought to show charge. Next, turn off one magneto. Your loss of RPM should not exceed 100. Now make a quick check on the other mag. Running an engine at high manifold pressure on one mag may cause serious detonation. Next, test the prop circuit breakers. Pull the prop governor control lever back from its high RPM setting until it drops 200. Advance the prop control to the original setting. Use the feather switch to check the prop. When RPM starts to drop, switch back to normal position. Put the prop selector switch in decrease. As soon as RPM drops 200, move the switch to increase. When the RPM goes back to 2100, put the switch in automatic. Now go through the same procedure for the other engine. And then you're ready for the final check. Fuel booster pumps at high. Fuel pressure between 15 and 19 pounds per square inch. Prop circuit breakers down. Prop switches at automatic. Prop controls at high RPM. Mixture auto rich. Intercooler flaps closed. Upper cowl flaps closed. Lower cowl flaps open about 1/4. Wing flaps 1/3 down. Gyro instruments uncaged. Oil temperature should be between 40 and 90 degrees centigrade. Oil pressure 75 to 90 pounds per square inch at 2,000 RPM. Cylinder heads between 120 to 205 degrees centigrade. Hydraulic and accumulator pressure 800 to 1,100 pounds per square inch. Now you're ready to scramble. Yes, the P-61A takes off like a homesick angel. But flying the P-61B is smoother and even more efficient, with these latest modifications giving her top performance. A rack for night binoculars, a new wrinkle in night fighting, an electrically operated accessory panel, push-button type circuit breakers, 2 improved heating units, trim tab removed from aileron, landing gear with a neutral position. In the down position, a lock prevents the gear from being raised accidentally. Main gear nacelle doors close with wheels down. Taxi lights on the nose wheel. Now let's go upstairs and watch another P-61 go through its paces. A YP in this case. The ship takes off at about 105 miles an hour, indicated without flaps. She'll fly herself off the ground. But now let's see how the P-61 takes off with flaps. Using quarter flaps provides another normal takeoff. Notice that the nose need be raised very little. But if you ever have to take off from a bombed field in a hurry, use 2/3 flaps. Keep nose wheel on ground until you have flying speed, then pull her loose. Climb a few feet and level off to gain speed. The P-61 will take off in a short space if you handle her correctly. Here's another way to clear an obstacle at the end of the runway. Flaps down 2/3 again. But this time, stay on the ground as long as possible, gaining all the speed you can. Then pull up steeply and keep climbing until the obstacle is cleared. 140 miles per hour gives you the best rate of climb, but 160 is generally recommended for normal operation. The higher speed keeps the engine running cooler. For normal cruising, use 2230 RPM or less. Manifold pressure, 29 to 34.5 inches in auto lean. Oil temperature, 60 to 85 degrees centigrade. Oil pressure, 60 to 90 pounds per square inch. Fuel pressure, 15 to 17 pounds per square inch. Cylinder head temperature, about 210 degrees centigrade. Generator voltage, 28 to 28.5. Amps, 200 maximum each when using turret and all radio equipment. Shift the supercharger every 3 hours to prevent accumulation of sludge. The Widow is very easy to get along with. She won't give you any trouble on turns. Climbs like a monkey. Dives well. Here she is doing a chandelle. A stall at about 95 miles per hour with flaps up and power off. The response and effectiveness of elevator and rudders is completely normal. Elevator forces are exceptionally light for a ship of its size due to the spring-loaded tabs. Failure of either engine in flight isn't a problem if you follow the proper procedure. Hit the feathering switch, then close the throttle. Move the mixture control to idle cutoff. Turn the fuel supply of the dead engine off. Snap the ignition switch off after the prop stops rotating. Put the live engine in auto rich. And trim your rudder tab. Close the cowl flaps on the dead engine all the way. And finally, close the oil cooler flaps and intercooler shutter on the dead engine. Even when stalled on one engine, the Black Widow isn't in trouble. On one engine, you can turn in either direction if you maintain safe single-engine airspeed, have your plane trimmed properly, and remember coordination. And don't be timid about racking her around. You can even do vertical banks into the dead engine if you keep her at proper flying speed. To unfeather is equally simple. Turn the ignition switch on with the throttle closed. Set the prompt control lever to the decrease RPM position. Turn on the fuel supply. Move the mixture control to auto rich. Set the feathering switch to normal position and hold the selector switch in the increase RPM until your engine speed reaches 800 RPM. Then release the selector switch. When minimum engine operating temperatures have been reached, place selector switches in automatic. And finally, adjust mixture, throttle, and prop levers to the desired power and engine RPM and retrim the ship. In case of both fuel and booster pump failure on one of the engines, turn on cross-feed valve and the booster pump of the operating engine to high. If, in an emergency, you need the absolute maximum performance, use the water injection, which is found on most P-61s. Just shove the throttles all the way open. That turns on the pumps. And then push the water injection switch. That sends the water into the engine. To use the autopilot, turn on the pressure valve. Pressure should be between 100 and 125 pounds per square inch. Trim the ship so it'll fly hands off. Uncage the gyro pilot instruments. Line up the control indices. First the rudder. Then the aileron. And last the elevator. Set the speed valve at 2 or 3. Now turn on the autopilot. And finally, if necessary, readjust the indices for level flight. Well, I guess we've been up long enough. Let's head for the barn. Turn the autopilot and cockpit heaters off. Check to see that de-icer and anti-icer are off. Turret stowed. Fuel to fullest tank. Cross-feed valve off. Mixture auto-rich. Fuel booster pumps high. Supercharger neutral. When airspeed drops below 175, lower gear and check it. Hydraulic and accumulator pressure, 800 to 1100 pounds per square inch. Props, automatic and set for 2400 RPM. And lower your flaps. Retrim the elevators. Check brake pressure with your toe. Approach at not less than 110 miles an hour. Touchdown at about 90 miles an hour. Tail down. That was the landing with 3/4 flaps. Let's go back and look at some other types. If you want to use less runway, for example, just lower the flaps all the way. Remember, you have a lot more drag with full flaps, so come in with a little more power. The P-61 was designed with a large area of flaps for slow landings at night. If you're forced to land on a short runway, make a power approach. Use full flaps and fly the airplane quite slowly. You'll have to keep considerable power to prevent stalling, but the ship will get down in less than 1,000 feet this way. For a single-engine landing, bank into the good engine if practicable when you enter the traffic pattern. Lower the wheels just after you turn into the approach, but don't lower the flaps until you're sure of making the field. Use some power on the good engine. Try to make your approach as normal as possible. If you're going faster than normal, fly the plane onto the ground and use the brakes rather than holding it off to lose the excess speed. Some pilots prefer to make a landing with no power. It may be done with full flaps. The glide must be quite steep in order to maintain airspeed, and the flare should be started rather high so the plane won't mush into the ground. But now let's see what happens after the wheels are on the ground. Hold the nose off the ground as long as possible in order to spare the brakes. After you complete the landing run and come to a stop, be sure the cowl flaps are open and raise the wing flaps. Idle the engines at 1,000 to 1,200 RPM until cylinder head temperatures drop below 205 degrees centigrade. Mixture should be auto-rich, and all cowl flaps open. Advance throttle to 25 inches and pull her back, cleaning out the engine. Now move the mixture to idle cutoff and advance throttles to full open as the engines die. Turn off all switches. Hold brakes until chocks are under each wheel, then release. Finally, lock the controls. Well, that ends your first lesson in learning how to fly the Black Widow. You have a long way yet to go, but it's usually a case of love at first flight. She's that kind of an airplane. The Black Widow is designed to kill. The fury of her guns and the flaming wrecks of her victims are lighting up dark skies over enemy strongholds. To you who will fly her at night in hard-hitting air battles, we say good luck and good hunting.
In the waning days of World War II, the world of military aviation was at a turning point. By the close of 1944, America's prop-driven B-29 Superfortress was pushing the limits of extended-duration bombing missions thanks to technological advances like its uniquely pressurized cabin and remote-controlled defensive turrets. On the other side of the fight, the Nazi Messerschmitt Ne-262, the world's first operational jet aircraft, was proving that the days of propeller-driven fighters were numbered. In a very real way, the future of warfare in the skies was so in flux that in the minds of many, just about anything seemed possible. At the onset of World War II, a number of British Royal Air Force units were still operating biplanes. By the end of the war, jet fighters were screaming across the sky in massive air battles for the future of Europe. The famed Supermarine Spitfire, so often credited with winning the Battle of Britain, offered its pilots little more than a floating reticle on the windscreen, and 15 seconds worth of ammunition if a pilot were so bold as to release it all in just one volley. As technology advanced, many aircraft were fitted with more powerful guns and more efficient engines. But dogfighting remained a close-quarters shootout, a far cry from the over-the-horizon missile engagements of today. The race for being the most technologically innovative country was more important than ever, particularly in aviation, as entirely new air forces were built from the ground up. Almost 1 million aircraft were produced worldwide for warfare, and even though the United States joined the war later than most of the other technologically advanced countries, they didn't want to be left behind to keep up with the new technologies such as jet power and flying wings. But it was that powerful belief that air warfare was changing that prompted a number of governments to pursue unique and original air combat ideas that, in hindsight, seemed downright crazy. One such program was Northrop's XP-79, better known as the Flying Ram or the Flying Chainsaw. They wanted to design something that had never been seen before. The XP-79 was at a time thought to be the answer. Its purpose was to attack enemy bombers at unusually high speeds by ramming into them without suffering any damage itself. Its unique shape and strong magnesium-covered armor would allow it to slice off the tails and wing from any enemy aircraft. The crucial battle for air superiority during World War II saw the secret development of many aviation technologies, but it would ultimately be brute bombing force that would pound Germany into submission. In the late stages of World War II, just as the odds were starting to favor the Allied forces, American bomber formations in Europe were frequently attacked by a new German rocket-powered jet, the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet. And even though these small jets brought plenty of show and theatrics to aerial combat, they weren't very effective. Still, the American public marveled at the design and technology of these innovations and wondered when they would get a small fighter jet of their own. What they didn't know was that the U.S. Army Air Forces were already working with Northrop Corporation on a project of just that magnitude. The Northrop XP-79 was the brainchild of this ambitious project. Jack Northrop, who is one of America's most innovative aircraft designers, intended for it to ram into enemy bombers and split them open. The XP-79 was much smaller than its stealthy successors would be, with a fuselage built only large enough for a single pilot to lay down in horizontally, making this aircraft's first significant departure from common flying wing designs as we know them today. Northrop and his team believed that the pilots would be able to withstand greater G-forces if they were oriented in a laying position, and because the XP-79 was designed to utilize jet propulsion, the shift seemed prudent. Born in Newark, New Jersey in 1895, Northrop grew up in Santa Barbara, California. In 1916, Northrop's first job in aviation was working as a draftsman for the Santa Barbara-based Lockheed Aircraft Manufacturing Company. After the outbreak of the First World War, Northrop was drafted into the U.S. Army, where he served in the Army Signal Corps. Northrop served in the military for 6 months before Lockheed successfully petitioned for his return to work in the private sector. In 1923, Northrop joined Douglas Aircraft Company, participating in the design of the Douglas round-the-world cruiser and working up to project engineer. In 1927, he rejoined the Lockheed brothers in their newly founded Lockheed Aircraft Company, working as chief engineer on the Lockheed Vega, the civilian transport monoplane with a cantilever wing that produced unusually high performance for that period, and was also widely used by such pilots as Wiley Post, Amelia Earhart, and Hubert Wilkins. In 1929, he produced an all-metal monoplane with pilot and engine within the wing structure. Although this aircraft had booms to attach to the tail group, it was in fact the step towards the flying wing. In 1929, Northrop struck out on his own, founding the Avion Corporation, which he was forced to sell to the United Aircraft and Transport Corporation in 1930. In 1932, Northrop, backed by Donald Douglas of Douglas Aircraft, founded another company, the Northrop Corporation, in El Segundo, California. There, he worked as chief engineer, and he helped design the A-17 attack plane for the Air Corps as well as the BT-1 bomber for the Navy during the Great Depression. This company built 2 highly successful monoplanes, the Northrop Gamma and the Northrop Delta. By 1939, the Northrop Corporation had become a subsidiary of Douglas Aircraft, so Northrop founded another completely independent company of the same name in Hawthorne, California, a site located by Moy Stevens, one of the co-founders. While working at this company, Northrop focused on the flying wing design, which he was convinced was the next major step in aircraft design. His first project, a reduced-scale version tested in 1940, ultimately became the giant Northrop YB-35. The Northrop XP-56 Black Bullet, a welded magnesium fighter, was one of the more significant of his World War II designs, along with the Northrop P-61 Black Widow, the first American night interceptor, of which more than 700 were constructed. His inventions continued into the post-war era of jet aircraft to produce the Northrop F-89 Scorpion all-weather interceptor, the Northrop YB-49 long-range bomber, the Northrop Snark intercontinental missile, and automatic celestial navigation systems. He produced a number of flying wings, including the Northrop N1M, Northrop N9M, and Northrop YB-35. His ideas regarding flying wing technology were years ahead of the computer and electronic advances of the fly-by-wire stability systems, which allow inherently unstable aircraft like the B-2 Spirit flying wing to be flown like a conventional aircraft. The flying wing in the pursuit of low-drag, high-lift designs were Northrop's passion and its failure to be selected as the next-generation bomber platform after World War II, and the subsequent dismantling of all the prototypes and incomplete YB-49s were a severe blow to him. He believed that such a jet with a single airfoil surface would have the most effective lifting capabilities. The lack of a fuselage and tail unit would mean less drag to affect overall performance and lower production costs. In his mind, it was a win-win. In 1942, Jack Northrop proved himself to be well ahead of his fellow American competitors and previous employers when his flying wing concept took a dramatic step forward. He convinced the United States Army Air Forces that he could build a flying wing fighter jet that could fly faster than the speed of sound. In January 1943, a contract for 2 prototypes with designation XP-79 was issued by the United States Army Air Force. Northrop's program began in 1943 with the code name Project 12 as its aircraft designation. It would have to be developed with the utmost secrecy as spying eyes could steal the advanced technology. Their plan was a rocket-powered flying wing designed with a total wingspan of only 32 feet. It would also be less likely to be spotted by enemy radars. Such a flight mission was not by the faint of heart. Experts believe that since the fighter's layout was so revolutionary and new, test glider prototypes had to be built to verify the validity of the concept. Given the Northrop designation NS-12, the gliders were also given project numbers from the USAAF. Confusingly, 2 project numbers were used, one MX-324 when discussing secret aspects of the power gliders, and another MX-334 relating to the aircraft being built and flown as pure gliders. The NX-334 emerged as a flying wing glider with no tail surfaces, similar in layout and construction to the Northrop N9M. Completed in late spring 1943, the number 1 MX-334 was tested in NACA Langley's wind tunnel, after which a large wire-braced fin was added to ensure directional stability at high speeds. For a more comprehensive test, a Lockheed P-38 Lightning was used to tow the aircraft on its first proper flight on the 2nd of October 1943. It had a tricycle undercarriage, which ensured a level floor when the aircraft was at rest. The power plants were designed to be placed deep into the fuselage aft. The development of the Aerojet's rocket motor lagged behind. In an effort to get in step with the program, that is, to meet its contract obligations and actually get a rocket-powered aircraft into the air, Aerojet built a smaller interim 200-pound rocket motor, the XCal 200, fueled by monoethyl aniline and nitric acid. The rocket fuel burned quickly, and a flight time of just under 4 minutes was estimated, although the performance wouldn't be enough for a production model. The installation of this motor meant that the glider number would only now serve as a powered air vehicle for the P-79 program under the MX-324 program. Following the crash and complete destruction of the glider, the number 2 gliders stepped up to become the powered MX-324. Testing with the rocket motor commenced on the 22nd of June 1944. With the first air tow launch for a powered flight on the 5th of July 1944, making it one of the first US-built rocket-powered aircraft to fly. Adjacent to the NX-324's development was the Northrop XP-79. This model was of greater military value, as it was designed to compete with the German Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet. Originally, just as with the MX-324, it was to be rocket-powered and it also required a pilot lying prone in the cockpit. The XP-79 was to be able to reach speeds of 500 miles an hour, and the cabin would be pressurized to ensure the survival in the estimated 40,000 feet ceilings. In contrast with the authentic flying wings, the XP-79 design had a large swept wing surface paired with vertical tail fins at the rear for extra stabilization and maneuverability. Aerojet was never able to overcome the limitations of the XCal 200 rocket tested with the MX-324. Instead, Westinghouse was chosen to deliver a pair of new turbojet engines. Each of these 19 Bs would generate 1,150 pounds of thrust. The cockpit was at the center of the triangle's apex and straddled on either side by twin intakes to aspirate the twin engines. The undercarriage had 4 landing gear legs and 1/4 arrangement instead of the more conventional 3-legged form. The armed forces' most fundamental requirement for this project was that the new flying wing would be able to ram into enemy bombers. The Germans had aircraft utilizing similar concept already in battle. Even though these yielded mixed results, America wanted the tactic in their arsenal as well. It was an approach that, by modern standards, now sounds delusional. After the testing period finished, the XP-79 was supposed to fly out from nearby Allied air bases against incoming enemy bombers. In practice, the XP-79 would launch from nearby Allied air bases against a flight of incoming enemy bombers. It would have launched quickly through the use of rocket boosters and reach high altitudes within minutes. With no armament intended for the design, the XP-79 pilot was expected to make several high-speed passes through enemy formation and utilize the reinforced wing leading edges to effectively slice through the airframes of enemy bombers themselves. As the XP-79 would have moved at such high speeds, enemy gunners could theoretically not target and fire upon the aircraft within time, so very little danger was apparent to the XP-79 pilot, aside from the fact that he was expected to ram his exceptional aircraft into the enemy. An armored glass mounting at the cockpit would protect the pilot's head and face during dives, while the body would be covered in heavy-gauge magnesium armor plating to mitigate the damage while ramming into enemy aircraft. However, by 1945, the XP-79 was being readied for a kind of battle that no longer existed. Fear of Hitler's bombers reached their greatest heights in the Battle of Britain, but further Luftwaffe bombing formations never materialized into the mid-late war years. As the prospect of facing off against wave after wave of German bombers subsided, the XP-79 mission profile became a moot point. Among the USAAF brass, someone must have recognized the absurdity of that idea, because the XP-79B order also stipulated that the fighters should accommodate 450 caliber Browning machine guns outboard of the jet engines. Neither the guns nor the cockpit pressurization system were destined to be installed in the plane. The airframe used to create the XP-79B was formerly the number 3 XP-79, since it could be more easily converted into a turbojet-powered air vehicle rather than a rocket-powered air vehicle. The first flyable XP-79B was painted white and was given the serial number 43-352437. It was struck to the Muroc Dry Lake testing facility in preparation for its first flight. Its first ominous taxiing tests were conducted in June 1945. During which all of the tires burst on at least several occasions. The flying chainsaw later actually had only one flight test, which lasted less than half an hour and ended with disastrous consequences. Northrop chose test pilot Harry Cosby for the flight test. On the morning of September 12, 1945, Crosby taxied out and lined up for takeoff. He powered up the plane's 2 Westinghouse Electric Corporation Model 19B engines to begin his takeoff roll and, at about 120 miles an hour, rotated the nose landing gear wheel and lifted off from the dry lake bed. At first, the unique semi-flying wing piloted by Harry H. Crosby performed well. Then, about 15 minutes into the test, the twin turbojet-powered XP-79B went completely out of control. The craft entered a steep vertical spin and crashed on the ground, where it burned completely, fueled by the highly flammable magnesium metal of its body. At the first sign of trouble, Crosby, who had been piloting from a prone position, struggled to escape. He managed to remove the escape hatch above his head, but the 38-year-old Crosby, most likely knocked unconscious by the wildly gyrating air vehicle, was bucked out of the cockpit. He fell to his death with his parachute still packed. After the crash, Northrop's founder and president issued the following statement. The takeoff for this flight was normal, and for 15 minutes, the airplane was flown in a beautiful demonstration. The pilot mounted confidence by executing more and more maneuvers of a type that would not be expected unless he were thoroughly satisfied with the behavior of the airplane. After about 15 minutes of flying, the airplane entered what appeared to be a normal slow roll, from which it did not recover. As the rotation about the longitudinal axis continued, the nose gradually dropped, and at a time of the impact, the airplane appeared to be in a steep vertical spin. The pilot endeavored to leave the ship, but the speed was so high that he was unable to clear it successfully. Unfortunately, there was insufficient evidence to determine the cause of the disaster. However, in view of his prone position, a powerful electronically controlled trim tab had been installed in the lateral controls to relieve the pilot of excessive Gs. It is believed that the deliberate slow roll may have been attempted, and that during this maneuver something failed in the lateral controls in such a way that the pilot was overpowered by the electrical trim mechanism. The USAAF accepted the number 1 XP-79B on a crash delivery basis in December 1945, and action was taken in January 1946 to terminate the remaining phases of the P-79 program, which had been an extremely advanced program for the era. The remaining unpowered MX-334, Glider 1, did not survive, and its final disposition remains unclear. The Northrop Aircraft Corporation XP-79 program led to the first piloted flight of a rocket-powered aircraft in America. The XP-79B was unique in its semi-flying wing design and prone position of its pilot, as well as the floor-point landing gear arrangement, twin vertical tails, and Delos-type flight control system attached to either tip of its wing. In addition, its body was constructed from magnesium alloy rather than aluminum alloy. Unfortunately, America's first rocket man, Harry H. Crosby, was lost during the XP-79B's first and only flight. With his tragic loss and the demise of the XP-79B, no replacement was ordered. Northrop and his engineers determined the XP-79 control problem could be fixed for the next test. Still, the U.S. Air Force didn't want to risk any further disasters, so they decided to abandon the project. World War II was over anyways, and more conventional jet designs were already entering production. The techniques used to create the XP-79, however, aided in the development of other future projects. Northrop's obsession with flying wing designs finally came true when he developed his B-35 and B-49 bombers.
The B-2 Spirit takes the shape of a flying wing, serving as a strategic bomber. Its streamlined and efficient design makes it nearly undetectable by enemy radar. Despite being one of the most sophisticated weapons in America's arsenal, its journey to deployment was nearly jeopardized. Jack Northrop, an aviation legend, conceived the idea of the flying wing, turning his inspiration into an all-consuming obsession. When persistent design issues led the military to discard his prototype as scrap metal, Jack Northrop retired, deeply disheartened. Nevertheless, the vision of the flying wing that he passionately pursued persists. Featuring a striking black wedge shape spanning 172 feet from wingtip to wingtip, the B-2 Spirit resembles a futuristic bird of prey more than any other human-made object in the sky. It boasts an impressive payload capacity of 40,000 pounds, capable of carrying conventional or nuclear weapons to any target worldwide. Its unique ability to attack with pinpoint accuracy while maintaining near invisibility to enemy radar sets it apart. This revolutionary aircraft stands as the latest addition to a lineage of U.S. nuclear intercontinental bombers dating back to the Cold War's inception in the late 1940s. The B-36 Peacemaker, the initial and largest among these planes, was chosen for production over the direct predecessor of the B-2, the YB-49. The narrative of these two aircraft, one colossal and conventional, the other sleek and a flying wing, is steeped in competition, controversy, dreams, and disappointments, reflecting the vision of a pioneering aviator who envisioned the flying wing as the shape of the future. The visionary figure was none other than Jack Northrop. Jack Northrop firmly believed in the principle that if something is both efficient and beautiful, it is right. This philosophy infused a sense of velocity into every aircraft he designed. Commencing his career at Lockheed in 1919, Jack Northrop's passion for creating the perfect airplane led him through pivotal roles at Douglas, Boeing, and eventually his own company.
His peers respected him and considered him one of the design geniuses of American aviation. Donald Douglas mentioned that there's a little bit of Jack Northrop in every American airplane that's been designed.
When you walk around the United States Air Force Museum, you see the little influences of Northrop. You can actually see the imprint of the man's work. We have an A-17, and his name is just stamped all over this aircraft. It's a gorgeous airplane to begin with, and it shows a certain degree of sophistication that some of the other designers weren't quite there yet.
One of Northrop's groundbreaking contributions to aircraft design was the introduction of the all-metal monocoque fuselage. This innovation eliminated the need for drag-inducing wing supports like struts and wires.
We have in our collection a Northrop Alpha, and it was the first monocoque aircraft built by Northrop. It was very unique. It was used for carrying passengers like an airliner, and then later on when what they call a CAA said that we needed a multi-engine aircraft for airliners, it was relegated to carrying the mail. All-metal, monocoque structured airplane, very well built.
In the 1920s, Northrop Company played a pivotal role in designing the Spirit of St. Louis for Charles Lindbergh. Additionally, they crafted the first all-metal low-wing fighters for both the Navy and Army Air Corps. Northrop's influence extended to the design of the Lockheed Vega, a highly successful aircraft flown by aviation pioneers Wiley Post and Amelia Earhart in the 1930s. The profits from this venture fueled his ambition to pursue a project he had dreamed of since adolescence, the flying wing. The flying wing concept, ingrained in nature itself, is a timeless design observed in various forms, from birds and sea animals to wind-borne seeds. Some aviation pioneers of the early 20th century were inspired by these examples, designing flying machines that attempted to emulate the wing-like aerodynamic shapes they observed in the natural world. Jack Northrop's fascination with the shapes of nature was deeply rooted in his upbringing in Santa Barbara, California. Observing the graceful soaring of seagulls above the local beaches inspired him to delve into the study of flight. During this time, he began sketching airplane designs, predominantly centered around one large wing. Aligned with the ideas of his predecessors, Northrop envisioned that such an aircraft, characterized by a prominent wing, could be significantly lighter and more efficient than traditional designs.
It's aerodynamically sounder. You don't need a stabilizer. You don't need the tail. You do not need a long fuselage, which all of these increase drag. More drag means you have to have more fuel to fly further distances.
However, the early wing design encountered challenges related to control and stability. Undeterred, Jack Northrop remained enthralled by the potential advantages of the flying wing. From the outset of his career, he committed himself to addressing the drawbacks associated with wing-only designs.
He worked for Lockheed and Douglas before he founded his own company, and of course at lunchtime the engineers would get together and have a little bull session, and they all kind of agreed that the flying wing was the ultimate design.
After conducting experiments with the gliders, Northrop, in 1929, reached a milestone by testing a powered prototype of a flying wing. Due to the uncertainties surrounding the aerodynamic stability of a pure flying wing, this design incorporated some features reminiscent of a conventional aircraft.
It did have twin-tail booms with a conventional tail in the back. He was trying to get the best lift coefficients on the wing roots and airfoils, and he learned a lot from that.
In the fall of 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, Northrop formed his own company, Northrop Aircraft, and began producing new aircraft and bombers for the U.S. and its allies. Simultaneously, Jack Northrop embarked on drafting plans for an innovative flying wing, envisioning a design where all control surfaces, including the rudders, were integrated into the trailing edge. This revolutionary approach aimed to eliminate the traditional tail, resulting in a pure flying wing. By the summer of 1940, Jack Northrop and his design team initiated test flights for their groundbreaking prototype, the N-1M, conducted on the deserted dry lake bed known as Muroc Army Airfield, just north of Los Angeles. Similar to Northrop's 1929 wing, the N-1M prototype faced challenges.
It was very underpowered. When they flew it out of Hawthorne, they wanted to move it to Edwards, which was Muroc at that time. They towed it over the hill with a DC-3. Didn't have the power to get over the hills. Well, it was the first successful wing. I don't know for what period of time they flew it, but it's now in the Smithsonian.
Despite the installation of a more suitable engine, the aircraft underwent 200 test flights at Muroc. Throughout this period, Northrop tirelessly sought solutions to the inherent stability issues prevalent in tailless aircraft designs. The quest for an optimal solution to control the phenomenon known as yaw presented the most formidable challenge.
Yaw is your left and right, where the airplane tends to yaw about its vertical axis. On a conventional airplane, this is controlled by rudder. On a winged vehicle, you have to have some device that creates drag at the wingtip to control or create yaw.
In 1941, General Hap Arnold, the commander of the U.S. Army Air Corps, took the notice of Northrop's N-1M. Arnold, actively searching for a new bomber capable of reaching Germany from the United States, recognized the strategic importance of such an aircraft. Although the United States had not yet declared war against Germany and Japan, the escalating concerns about Nazi Germany's successful air campaign against Britain raised the possibility of the Allies lacking secure air bases in Europe.
In 1940, when it was obvious that the British were in serious trouble and they may fall, with leaving just the United States to stand against Nazi Germany and the Axis powers, the Army Air Corps started looking for a super long-range bomber to be able to strike targets in Europe from continental United States.
The Army Air Corps issued a request for designs, specifically seeking a high-altitude bomber capable of carrying 10,000 pounds of bombs to its target and returning home, covering a total distance of 10,000 miles. Impressed by what he observed during a visit to Northrop at Muroc Field, General Hap Arnold, on November 22, 1941, signed a contract with Northrop to further develop his flying wing bomber, the N-1M.
It offered the possibility of ultra-long range. The flying wing was becoming more and more recognized as advanced. The aerodynamic aspects of it were quite evident, and the long range because of the low drag induced by the aircraft itself. Plus, we had to start thinking very progressively. We couldn't think of just a regular aircraft to get across the continental United States or across the North Atlantic or anywhere in the world.
Just 2 weeks later, on December 7, 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, propelling America into a global war. In this tumultuous period, Jack Northrop's dream of seeing the flying wing enter large-scale production seemed on the brink of realization. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor prompted the United States to declare war against the Axis powers and injected a renewed sense of urgency into the development of Jack Northrop's flying wing superbomber, the B-35. To hasten the testing of the design, the Army allocated funds for the construction of experimental prototype versions, which were 1/3 the size of the B-35, reflecting the nation's determination to expedite the development of advanced aircraft during this critical time in history. Looking like something out of a Buck Rogers matinee, these aircraft, with the designation N-9M, first took flight in December 1942. The fully restored N-9MB, currently the sole flying example, occasionally graces the skies near its home at the Planes of Fame Museum in Chino, California.
The wingspan of the B-35 was 179 feet. This is roughly 60 feet. So it's 1/3 scale, same airfoil, same sweep, same dihedral, just scaled 1/3. The thrust center line of the two engines replicates the center line thrust of the 4 engines on the B-35, and the thrust to weight ratio is roughly the same.
Among its numerous innovations, the Northrop N-9M holds the distinction of being the first aircraft equipped with hydraulically boosted flight controls. The wing itself featured groundbreaking control surfaces, with Northrop ingeniously combining the functions of the aileron and elevator into a single component called an elevon.
This is your primary pitch and roll control. That is, if they both go up and down, you get a pitch input, and if they're differential, you get a roll input. That's where you bank. Out here is the rudder, which is a drag device. It splits, it creates a drag on the wingtip.
Normal airplane has a rudder at the back of the airplane, if you recall, on a fuselage for directional turns and so forth. So he had to basically invent how he would actually steer or fly the airplane.
To address the absence of a traditional tail, the N9M's design incorporated elevons, creating a distinctive flying experience for its pilots. This uniqueness remains evident in today's aviation landscape.
Flies very well once you get used to it. Not difficult, just different. It's very meaningful to fly this. Certainly it would be to anybody that would have that opportunity. It's a very historic airplane, and once you see it fly, you understand why.
However, concurrently with Jack Northrop's endeavors in developing the flying wing bomber, a formidable competitor was also taking shape, the Convair B-36. It was developed by a group of engineers, including Robert Widmer.
I got involved with the B-36 in order to run the first wind tunnel test, subsonic wind tunnel test, which was to be run at MIT. And I was asked to run that program.
The B-36 emerged in response to the same Army Air Corps requirement for a bomber with the 10,000-mile range and 10,000-pound payload. However, it stood in stark contrast to Jack Northrop's vision of beauty and efficiency embodied in the flying wing. In essence, the B-36 adopted a completely conventional design, diverging sharply from Northrop's aesthetic preferences. Its distinguishing feature was its sheer size, an unparalleled enormity in the history of aviation. The B-36 boasted a wingspan of 230 feet, surpassing the Wright brothers' inaugural flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, by over 100 feet.
The aircraft was going to be so large, they had to save weight any way they could. So it meant using new tanks to hold new types of gases to use for fire extinguishers on the engine. Something as simple as that sounding takes quite a bit of effort. You have to have new engines willing to pull this aircraft, or push it, as it turns out, for 2 days essentially on a mission and not stop.
This colossal aircraft overshadowed Northrop's B-35 design in every aspect, notably in the range and payload. Despite its impressive dimensions, the B-36 faced developmental challenges of its own. Consequently, the Army Air Corps chose to persist with Northrop's flying wing, recognizing its potential.
In case one failed, the other was there. And when you're talking about national survival, having a second option, even if it's expensive, the treasure needs to be spent to save the blood of the Republic later. And that's what they were doing. So it gave a fallback option.
As Jack Northrop continued refining his work on the B-35 bomber, he simultaneously delved deeper into exploring the possibilities and capabilities inherent in the flying wing concept.
Northrop also designed several flying wing fighters. I'm thinking of the P-79B flying ram, powered by twin Westinghouse turbojets. And it was a rather unique aircraft, and unfortunately, the war ended, they didn't do much with it.
Northrop also built the MX-334 rocket wing fighter, America's first rocket-powered airplane, and the piston-powered XP-56 Black Bullet. Despite their promise, both the flying wing bomber and the B-36 encountered substantial development issues and never transitioned into full-scale production. In 1944, as focus shifted towards the larger and more heavily payloaded B-36, the Army reconsidered the future of the B-35. Rather than pursuing its role as a heavy bomber, the Army envisioned the B-35 as a potential experimental medium-range bomber and reconnaissance aircraft. The urgency for such craft diminished with the non-occurrence of the potential crisis that had initially spurred the development of the flying wing bomber and the B-36, the fall of Britain. The heavy bomber role within the U.S. Air Force was, in the meantime, fulfilled by a series of other aircraft such as the B-17 Flying Fortress, the B-24 Liberator, and the B-29 Superfortress, none of which were connected to Jack Northrop. In August 1945, One of the war's concluding acts saw the B-29 named Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, dropping the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another B-29 targeted Nagasaki with a second atomic bomb. These events underscored the immense power wielded by bomber aircraft in the nuclear role. With the distant Soviet Union emerging as America's likely adversary in the post-war era, the urgent need for a new long-range heavy payload bomber became more apparent than ever.
What the atomic bomb does for air power is, for the first time, aviators can do what they say they can do. They can take out a strategic target, because now they don't have to send 1,000 planes across to do one job and go back. Now, one aircraft, one bomb can take out an entire industrial complex or an entire city if it's necessary to do so.
The geopolitical landscape and advent of nuclear capabilities elevated the importance of advanced bomber aircraft for strategic purposes. Partly for this reason, development efforts on Jack Northrop's B-35 as a potential long-range nuclear bomber continued. In June 1946, almost a year after the war's end, Northrop's B-35 finally took flight. Measuring an impressive 172 feet from wingtip to wingtip, the B-35 was equipped with 4 robust 12,000 horsepower piston engines, each driving a pair of counter-rotating pusher propellers. The aircraft's 9-man crew included 3 gunners responsible for defending the plane with 50 caliber machine guns and remotely controlled barbettes. Despite the aircraft's futuristic appearance, the wing design presented challenges for Jack Northrop.
Jack Northrop had just a run of bad luck. The first aircraft crashed before he could draw the technical data that he needed from that aircraft, so he had to proceed with the second prototype. Without the necessary information that he would have garnered from the first one, which put the aircraft at a great disadvantage.
While he had successfully overcome various design obstacles, finding a viable solution to the problem of yawing proved elusive. The B-35 also grappled with issues such as overheating engines and gear shift vibration. Faced with these challenges, Northrop decided to integrate a new technology into the wing, turbojets. By this time, turbojets had become the preferred propulsion method for all new military aircraft. Experimental versions of the wings were outfitted with 8 turbojet engines, leading to its redesignation as the YB-49. The introduction of jet propulsion brought a transformative improvement in performance, swiftly resolving developmental problems like gear shaft vibration. Some test pilots even reported that the wings exhibited flight characteristics more reminiscent of a fighter than a traditional bomber, highlighting the positive impact of the shift to jet technology. At Northrop's suggestion, test pilot Robert Cardenas demonstrated the wing speed by undertaking a cross-country flight.
But an official speed record from Edwards all the way back to Andrews Air Force Base showed it off to President Truman, and Truman went through the airplane and saw it flying, and he thought we ought to buy some of these.
The transition to larger jet engines on the YB-49 posed significant challenges, as it reduced the wing's bomb capability precisely when a much larger payload and range, akin to that of the B-36, were needed to transport the massive and heavy atomic bombs in use at the time all the way to the Soviet Union. Furthermore, Jack Northrop's wings still grappled with serious stability issues. On June 5, 1948, during a series of stall tests on the YB-49, Danny Forbes and Major Glenn Edwards were at the controls. The night before, Edwards had expressed optimism about the wing's progress, noting its impressive performance despite numerous test flights and extensive flying hours. However, he acknowledged that the stability remained a significant problem, adding, "But the plane goes like hell." Tragically, during the tests that day, the pilot lost control of the aircraft, resulting in a crash and fire that claimed the lives of all 5 crew members. In honor of Major Glenn Edwards, the base at Muroc was renamed Edwards Air Force Base when the U.S. Air Force was officially established as a separate military branch. This renaming commemorated the sacrifice of those involved in advancing aviation and aeronautical innovation. Fearing that his beloved flying wing was doomed as a military project because of high-profile failures like the Glenn Edwards crash, Jack Northrop launched a publicity campaign promoting the flying wing as the airliner of tomorrow.
Now a preview of the flying wing transport of tomorrow. The midsection provides ample room for 80 passengers. Spaciousness keynotes the luxurious main lounge, extending 53 feet inside the wing. And future air travelers will really see something. Through the plexiglass windows of the front wing edge, passengers have an unimpaired view of the Earth unrolling thousands of feet below. Coast-to-coast flights in 4 hours may not be too far away.
Despite earnest efforts, no civilian air service expressed interest in the flying wing, leading to the U.S. Air Force's decision to cancel Northrop's contract in 1948. Instead, they opted to proceed with the Convair B-36. The cancellation of the flying wing project remains a contentious decision, with accusations of political bias favoring Convair mingling with the concerns about issues with the YB-49. Critics argued that political considerations played a role in the decision-making process, but undeniable were the significant stability problems inherent in the flying wing design. Many viewed the YB-49 as unstable both as a bombing platform and a long-range reconnaissance aircraft.
It was understood by the Air Force at the time, even when they canceled the program. It had great potentials, but not quite now. Maybe someday in the future.
For Jack Northrop, the most devastating blow came when the Air Force ordered the destruction of all existing flying wings, melting them down into aluminum ingots.
It was devastating. Come in, see strangers come in and cut up your product right in front of your employees. It was really disheartening, of course.
This experience deeply disturbed Northrop, prompting him to leave his company and take an early retirement, completely withdrawn from the aviation industry. In the race to be armed and ready for the Cold War, the B-36 emerged victorious over the flying wing. For the next decade, the B-36's colossal presence dominated the skies, serving as the backbone for America's nuclear arsenal. On December 7, 1948, exactly 7 years after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, a giant silver bird with 6 pusher-type props departed from Carswell Air Force Base, Texas. Over the Pacific, near Hawaii, it opened its bomb bay doors and dropped a payload of 10,000 pounds of dummy bombs into the ocean, symbolizing the era of strategic air power during the Cold War. This airplane was the Convair B-36, and it had demonstrated, among other things, that it was a true intercontinental bomber capable of striking at almost any target in the world. The B-36 embarked on a long and challenging journey, marked by disappointments, delays, and intense controversy from its inception on the drawing board to its eventual operational status.
It was a disaster. We needed to change the wing, and I knew we had to change the control surfaces. We had to put a different kind of fan on because it's a pusher engine to cool the things on the ground statically when it's not moving. The whole airplane had to be totally redesigned here, and we did that.
One pivotal element in the final decision to proceed with the troubled project was the escalating tensions of the Cold War. Air Force Secretary Stuart Symington, recognizing the B-36 as the sole bomber capable of reaching targets inside the Soviet Union, played a crucial role in the program's continuation. The Strategic Air Command, or SAC, led by General Curtis LeMay, emerged as the primary custodian of U.S. nuclear weapons, and the B-36 became the cornerstone of U.S. Cold War strategy.
It was the main part of Strategic Air Command. It was General Curtis E. LeMay's big stick. We flew everywhere, made lots of noise. Of course, there was a big battle going on, whether you should get aircraft carriers or you should get B-36s. And at that time, the B-36 won.
The logistical challenge of finding a sufficiently large facility to assemble the colossal B-36 was formidable.
Do you have floor space to build this monster? It's huge. You need a big hangar to put it in, to build it in. So where do you build it? You have to go to Fort Worth, where they just happen to have a large enough facility, and it's all enclosed so people can't peek in the windows.
The mile-long facility in Fort Worth, Texas, originally constructed for assembling B-24 bombers during World War II, stood as the only building on the planet spacious enough to accommodate the gigantic B-36. In the air, the B-36, often referred to as the Big Stick, boasted an extraordinary fuel capacity, enabling it to remain airborne for 2 days, far surpassing any other bomber in history. Additionally, it was the sole aircraft capable of carrying the exceptionally large and heavy nuclear weapons in the U.S. arsenal at the time.
People often ask, why did the B-36 have to be so large? Well, it had to carry a lot of fuel to fly long range, but it also had to have a massive bomb bay to carry the large thermonuclear weapons like on either side of the bomb bay. These are massive monsters, and it requires a massive bomb bay to carry them.
With 4 bomb bays, each with a capacity of 3 freight cars, the B-36 could carry a maximum payload of 84,000 pounds, exceeding the gross weight of the B-29. The B-36 thus represented a formidable and unprecedented force during this critical period of Cold War military strategy.
One of the biggest problems was building the frame to build the aircraft.
They finally brought in a bridge builder, and he designed what we called a K-type frame that actually was a basic strength holding the fuselage together.
Designing adequate landing gear for the 210-ton plane also posed unique problems.
When it was first designed, the B-36 wheel was the largest aircraft tire in existence in the United States at the time. This had problems. First, the weight of the wheel itself. It could push through any concrete runway at the time, except for a very few within the United States. The planners came up with a four-wheel design, like on a B-36 that you'll see over here. This aircraft had four wheels. First, it lowers the risk if one tire goes out, the plane won't crash on takeoff or landing. Also, by spreading the weight out over four tires, it increased the number of runways that the B-36 could operate with.
The original design of the B-36 featured six 28-cylinder, 4,360 cubic inch turbo-supercharged radial engines, each rated at 3,500 horsepower. However, reaching the promised service ceiling of 40,000 feet posed a formidable challenge, and the top speed of the bomber barely reached 230 miles an hour. Critics raised concerns about the B-36's vulnerability to enemy fighters, particularly the new Soviet MiG-15. The slow-flying bomber was considered by some as a sitting duck, leading to accusations of being a billion-dollar boondoggle. In 1950, congressional hearings were held, sparkling a scandal known as the B-36 affair. Both Convair and the U.S. Air Force underwent an investigation. The controversy further intensified as part of the heated debate between the Air Force and the Navy over which service should control the U.S. nuclear mission in 1951. Efforts to address some of the B-36's issues led to modifications in the form of adding a pair of J-47 turbojet engines under each wing, employing the slogan 4 burning and 6 turning. This modification significantly improved the Big Stick's performance, boosting its top speed to over 400 miles an hour and nearly doubling its rate of climb. With these enhancements, the modified B-36 could operate at higher altitudes than most fighters in the thin atmosphere at those elevations, offering an improved and more formidable version of the aircraft.
Some F-100s challenged us, and they were pretty braggadocio about how their airplanes can fly compared to this old hunk of metal here. 4 of them came in on us into a sharp turn. The guys that turned with us all stalled out and went down a little bit and didn't get us.
The B-36 featured retractable, remotely fired turrets with 20mm cannons located at the top, bottom, front, and rear of the aircraft, establishing it as the more heavily defended bomber in existence.
We were quite well protected if we had fighters coming in on us. We could put a good screen of lead out there.
A distinctive and unique feature of the B-36 was the pressurized tube light passageway, serving as a walkway to move between the front of the airplane and the crew compartment in the rear.
The tube was an 80-foot tube from the forward pressurized compartment to the aft pressurized compartment, and it had a little cart like one of these carts you would lie on working underneath a car. And you would get in there and grab a cable in there and then go to the aft compartment. There were doors on both ends so that if one compartment depressurized, you wouldn't be shot out like a cannon.
Despite its ongoing controversy surrounding the giant bomber, the Convair B-36 effectively fulfilled its role as a deterrent to nuclear war from 1949 to 1959.
At the very time when the American people are most nervous, all of a sudden you have this massive, huge, comforting aircraft that gives the American people a sense of security that allowed us to think things through more clearly, come to rational decisions. So it's a security blanket for the American people, as well as a deterrent to the Soviets.
In 1959, after a decade of service, the B-36 was replaced by the new jet-powered B-52 Stratofortress, another colossal conventional aircraft design. With Jack Northrop in retirement and no other flying wings in development, it seemed like the aeronautical world had moved beyond his dream. It would take nearly 30 years before an aircraft with a strangely familiar shape returned like a boomerang to replace the B-52, the B-2. During the test flights of Jack Northrop's flying wing bomber, one of the surprising outcomes was the difficulty Air Force personnel encountered in trying to track the plane on radar, showcasing the aircraft's advanced stealth capabilities. The B-2, inheriting the legacy of the flying wing, would go on to redefine strategic bomber capabilities with its stealth technology. The most important reason for this was its shape.
The elegance and economy of the wing's design meant that it had fewer surfaces to reflect a radar signal back to an enemy receiver than a conventional aircraft. The characteristics of the flying wing, particularly its difficulty to detect on radar, foreshadowed the development of stealth technology.
The advantage of using a stealth technology is that you can use this one aircraft to fly in and you can deliver a precision-guided weapon at your leisure. You don't have to worry nearly as much about enemy air defenses. They have to worry about you instead.
The quest for stealth technology emerged almost immediately after the introduction of radar during World War II. As radar became a ubiquitous element of warfare, efforts were initiated to find ways to deceive it. Early attempts involved jamming German radar with clouds of tinfoil strips, codenamed Window, which proved highly successful. However, little progress was made in the realm of making aircraft themselves less detectable. The inadvertent success of the flying wing in evading radar detection laid the foundation for the deliberate incorporation of stealth technology in subsequent aircraft. The SR-71 and the B-1 bomber were among the first U.S. aircraft to purposefully integrate stealth technology, although it was still in its early stages of development. Interestingly, the advantages in stealth demonstrated by the flying wings seemed to be overlooked following the cancellation of the program. It wasn't until the 1970s, with the Soviet air defense network becoming more formidable, that research on stealth design gained renewed impetus. Operating in secrecy, designers developed several prototypes, ultimately leading to the creation of the F-117 stealth fighter. Characterized by its heavily faceted shape, the F-117 reflects radar signals away from enemy receivers, making a significant leap forward in the evolution of stealth technology. The flying wing's early contributions to radar evasion became a critical foundation for the advancements that would follow in the realm of stealth aircraft design. But other scientists at Northrop Aircraft, working on an unrelated project in the early 1960s, had determined that the ideal shape for a stealth plane was actually far different than the angular form of the F-117.
We had a small group of what we called phenomenologists at the time. They were basically physicists and very bright young people with a wide open mind who became curious about why is it that we can see things on radar? Is there a way of having a shaping that will make it difficult to see? They came up with these shapes, and we were startled and pleased because, lo and behold, the shape they came up with was exactly the shape of a flying wing.
In the early 1970s, top-secret development commenced on what would eventually become the B-2 flying wing stealth bomber, designed to serve as America's next-generation nuclear transcontinental heavy bomber.
Essentially, it needed to be, number one, stealthy for future technologies and future enemy radar systems. It needed to have a large payload capacity. Thirdly, it needed to be precise. Lastly, it needed long range, intercontinental.
Similar to the challenges faced by the YB-49 and B-36, overcoming technological problems was just one aspect of the difficulties encountered during the development of the stealth bomber. Initiated during President Carter's administration, the B-2 project faced cancellation in the early days of President Reagan's first term, only to later be revived. Despite controversy, significant technical challenges, and substantial cost overruns, the development of the aircraft persisted. In the spring of 1980, an ailing and wheelchair-bound Jack Northrop visited the Northrop plant, where he was shown models for the future B-2 bomber. Notably, the B-2 was planned to have a wingspan of 172 feet, identical to Northrop's B-35 and YB-49. Touched by the experience, Northrop, who had less than a year to live, expressed, "Now I know why God has kept me alive the last 25 years. 8 years later, on November 22, 1988, the first B-2 Spirit was unveiled at the Northrop Site 4 facility in Palmdale, California. During the event, as the doors opened, Northrop President and CEO Thomas Jones made a spontaneous announcement, marking a significant milestone in the realization of Jack Northrop's enduring vision.
I was standing there, and obviously you get overcome by things, and you see this beautiful airplane come out, and you see this great crowd of people, and so on, and just said, "Jack Northrop, we salute you," which we all said.
The development of computer-assisted fly-by-wire flight controls, which were already being used by the F-117 and other advanced military aircraft, meant that the stability problems which had plagued Northrop's flying wing were no longer an issue in the stealth bomber.
The yaw developed as an inherent trait with a flying wing. What allows us to solve that problem now is the flight control computers are so fast that they're able to make the flight controls move fast enough that it stops that yawing from occurring. Conventional airplanes, early on, you physically would pull on the control stick, and it would move a series of cables and bellows and pulleys to make it all work. What fly-by-wire now does for us is allows the pilot to move the stick, and now computers take care of all that mechanical control, and it sends a computer signal out, just like calling on a telephone.
The aerodynamic efficiency inherent in Northrop's flying wing design paid dividends in the B-2 by allowing its engines to operate at lower power settings, contributing to a quieter operation of the aircraft. Notably, the grandson of the pilot who flew Enola Gay on the world's first nuclear mission is one of the pilots of these remarkable aircraft.
When you look at it, you don't really see any engines. You see a couple of small intake holes on the front, a couple of small exhaust holes on the back, and that's about it. All of that works together to help reduce the signature and make the airplane more stealthy.
Another key factor in the B-2's stealth compatibilities lies in the use of graphite composite material, which effectively absorbs radar energy. Maintaining a completely smooth surface on the airplane is also crucial in achieving optimal stealth characteristics.
With this aircraft, you have to be more careful not to scratch the paint, any surfaces and flight control surfaces. If I bump this aircraft with a stand, I'm liable to do anywhere from 30 to 40 hours worth of damage on a small scratch. With that paint missing, it's liable to get the radar absorbed and possibly point your position out to who's ever trying to track you.
These qualities collectively contribute to the B-2's remarkable success in the realm of stealth, providing it with the radar reflectivity equivalent to that of a basketball. Despite the challenges faced during its journey to production, the B-2 bomber had become the cornerstone of America's nuclear bomber force. However, its initial deployment in combat did not involve a centerpiece role in an atomic superpower showdown, but rather in a more conventional foreign conflict. In the early morning hours of March 24, 1999, two B-2 stealth bombers took off from their base at Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, marking a significant moment in the operational history of the B-2 in a more conventional military context. They crossed the North American continent, then the Atlantic, en route to targeted facilities in the former Yugoslavia.
I was going into my first mission, and I had stealthed up. When the controller came back to me, he said, "I've lost you on radar." And I tell you, that was just like a warm, fuzzy, reassuring feeling. Gave you goose pimples like, hey, this actually does work.
Approaching their targets with precision, the B-2 stealth bombers utilized their launch and leave capabilities during this crisis in Kosovo, successfully deploying 30 2,000-pound satellite-guided smart bombs. These smart bombs were designed to land within 30 feet of their programmed coordinates, showcasing the B-2's accuracy in delivering payloads.
When my weapons bay doors opened and the weapons started coming out, those 2,000-pounders coming out just shuttered the airplane. Don't. That's when the reality of what we actually were doing really hit pretty hard. And we started to see surface-to-air missiles being shot. It started just sinking in that, hey, this is for real.
After dropping their bombs, the bombers returned to Whiteman Air Force Base approximately 31 hours after takeoff. Notably, the B-2s executed their missions in a manner that often left the enemy unaware of their presence overhead. A highlight of the stealth bombers' weaponry during the Kosovo crisis was the deployment of the Joint Direct Attack munitions. JDAM transformed unguided bombs into highly precise weapons, contributing to the success of the B-2 in the 78-day air campaign.
We strapped on a tail kit. It has fins that move, and these GPS satellites, the global positioning system, feeds it current information, updating it all the time, all the way down until it strikes the target.
Throughout the campaign, B-2 Spirits flew 49 missions, with all aircraft and their crews performing flawlessly, marking an impressive combat debut for the Flying Wing stealth bomber.
49 for 49 on-town takeoffs, done with only 6 aircraft at the time. That's all we had here on this base. That's an amazing feat, to be able to keep that ops tempo at such a high level. Aircraft were talking to each other, coming and going from the targets. That's a unique concept of warfare that this nation or the world has never seen, where you have warriors taking off, going into combat, and returning home after a 30-hour mission, walking home into the house and honey, what'd you do today?
The 30-hour missions were exhausting, but the B-2 crew tried to find a way to stay occupied during the long flight.
15 hours on the way out are broken up by a couple of refuelings every 4 hours or so. And then you do your bombing, and then you come back home, same thing. So what we try to do is maximize the amount of downtime to relax, to study our targets, anything we can to keep our bodies as fresh as we can during the sortie.
Despite the successes in Kosovo, the B-2's substantial cost had remained a focal point of controversy. Originally planned as a fleet of 132 stealth bombers, the program was scaled down significantly, resulting in a total force of only 21 B-2s. Nevertheless, the B-2 is a vital part of a trio of long-range multi-purpose bombers that also includes the B-1 and the venerable B-52.
We've got some weapons upgrades coming along the line. We've just been certified with the Joint Standoff Weapon. We're starting into the cruise missile concept. So the B-2 could actually, if it has to, fight its way into the target area by launching cruise missiles and then delivering the JDAM, Joint Direct Attack Munition, which is extremely accurate.
With the B-2, you can go out, you can fly long distances, you can destroy targets within tens and sometimes ones of feet with precision weapons through any kind of weather that's out there. So if no one else can fly that night because the target area is socked in, here comes the mighty B-2 with its precision-guided weapons that doesn't need any assistance, comes in, delivers its weapons, and goes back home. That's why you need the B-2.
With our stealth capability, it allows us to be first in and create holes in the defensive environment that the conventional airplanes can now use to strike effectively. The B-2 is capable of getting in there first strike and basically putting the lights out.
The B-2 is definitely a long-term aircraft. The design is proven. The concept behind the design will last for a very long time. And its airframe, again, is just a very simple design that is so effective.
The B-2, proven in combat with its advanced stealth technology and versatility as both a nuclear deterrent and a multi-purpose bomber, is likely to remain a key element of the U.S. global military strategy for decades to come.
When you see the B-2 fly over and give you that profile of the flying wing, it is a stylish aircraft. It just shows efficiency mixed with style. I think the legacy of Northrop is to point the way to the future so that engineers today and in the future can look at what this man did and can move forward and take the United States into new technological realms in aviation.
However, despite the extraordinary success of the B-2, Jack Northrop's dream of fulfilling the skies with graceful flying wings has not yet been fully realized. Various challenges, including the expense and complexity of the computerized control systems needed for the flight stability, continue to impede the broader commercial acceptance of the flying wing concept. Nevertheless, as futuristic wing-like designs are once again being developed around the world, there is still a possibility that Jack Northrop's version of the flying wing, or something very much like it, could still represent the shape of things to come in aviation.
Aviation, the art of aeronautics, began with the dreamers, inventors, and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth, and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunderchief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter, was critical in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavyweight fighter, was used extensively in the same war. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is a close air support icon. The Messerschmitt Me-262 marked a leap forward in aviation technology. Each of these game changers were instrumental in their eras, and their legacies still resonate today. Beyond the game changers, there are those that have transcended their practical roles to become icons. The Concorde was not just an aircraft, it was a supersonic symbol of luxury and speed. The B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber, is an icon of power and resilience. These magnificent machines and others like them have become much more than just aircrafts. They are enduring icons that encapsulate the audacious spirit, the relentless innovation, and the boundless ambition that define the world of aviation. For more amazing aerial footage, and to join us in this incredible journey, check out the DroneScapes YouTube channel.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.